I'm Maya, 32 years old, and for the past 5 years, I've managed the Willow Creek Community Center. This isn't just a job, it's my lifeblood, a place where everyone, regardless of their background, should feel welcome. Willow Creek itself is a town steeped in history, its charm undeniable, but beneath the surface, old traditions and unspoken rules run deep. Our center was hosting its annual Heritage Festival, a celebration meant to unite us, showcasing diverse local talents. Everything was going smoothly until Chloe Sterling, a prominent figure in town and a descendant of one of Willow Creek's founding families, arrived. Her family's influence here was as old as the oak trees lining Main Street. Chloe had a reputation, subtle yet pervasive, for her old ways of thinking. She often made comments disguised as observations, laced with a casual dismissal of anyone who didn't fit her narrow view of Willow Creek's true heritage. I'd always tried to navigate her presence with grace, but today was different. During a performance by a local gospel choir, Chloe made a loud, disparaging remark about their music being too loud and not fitting the aesthetic of the festival. Her words were dripping with thinly veiled prejudice, audible to many, including the choir members themselves. It was a moment that demanded a response. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady as I approached her. I explained that such comments were unacceptable and violated the center's code of conduct, which explicitly promotes inclusivity. Chloe, with a dismissive wave of her hand, scoffed, "Oh, please, Maya. It's just an opinion." I looked her directly in the eye, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "Chloe," I said, my voice firm, "your opinion in this context is discriminatory. I'm afraid I have to ask you to leave the festival." A hush fell over the crowd nearby. Her eyes widened in disbelief, a flicker of outrage crossing her perfectly composed face. She was not used to being challenged, especially not by someone she likely considered beneath her social standing. Her family had always been untouchable in Willow Creek. "You're dismissing me?" she finally managed, her voice rising, drawing more attention. "Do you even know who I am, Maya? I practically built this town's cultural scene." Her indignation was almost comical, if not for the underlying malice. I reiterated my request, calmly but resolutely. "This center is for everyone, Chloe. Your behavior is creating a hostile environment." The tension in the air was thick, a silent battle playing out before the entire community. She straightened her shoulders, her face hardening into a mask of pure disdain. "You are despicable, Maya," she spat, loud enough for a dozen people to hear. "You will regret this. Mark my words, you will regret humiliating me." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed out, her departure leaving a ripple of whispers in her wake. The festival, which had been so vibrant just moments before, now felt charged with an uneasy silence. I knew then that I had just ignited a firestorm in Willow Creek. The immediate aftermath was a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief that I had stood my ground, dread for the inevitable consequences of crossing someone as powerful and vindictive as Chloe Sterling. This small town was about to become a very public stage. I tried to resume my duties, but every glance felt like an interrogation, every hushed conversation a judgment. The choir members, though grateful, looked worried for me. They knew, as I did, that Chloe's words were not an idle threat. That night, as I locked up the community center, the quiet streets of Willow Creek felt less comforting and more menacing. I had dismissed Chloe for racism, and she had publicly humiliated me, calling me despicable. But I knew this was just the beginning of her retaliation. I took a deep breath, the cool night air filling my lungs. I had to be ready for whatever Chloe, and perhaps the town itself, would throw at me. My commitment to the community center, and to justice, was about to be tested like never before. The morning after the festival incident, the air in Willow Creek felt heavy with unspoken words. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages, some supportive, many others filled with thinly veiled disapproval or outright condemnation. Chloe Sterling wasted no time in launching her public humiliation campaign. She started with a scathing post on the Willow Creek social media group, painting me as an unprofessional tyrant who had attacked her for a simple opinion. She framed herself as the victim, a pillar of the community unjustly maligned by an outsider who didn't understand Willow Creek's sensibilities. The comment section exploded. Many of Chloe's long-standing allies, people whose families had been intertwined with hers for generations, immediately jumped to her defense. They echoed her sentiments, questioning my judgment and my right to manage a public institution. Who does she think she is? One comment read, Chloe has done so much for this town. Another added, this is what happens when you let new people run things. No respect for our traditions. The digital space became a hostile echo chamber, amplifying her narrative. My initial shock quickly gave way to a deep ache in my chest. It wasn't just the words, it was the swiftness and ferocity of the attack. I had anticipated backlash, but the coordinated nature of it, the way it leveraged the town's social fabric, was chilling. Everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me. At the local grocery store, conversations abruptly ceased as I approached. Neighbors who usually greeted me with warm smiles now offered curt nods or avoided eye contact altogether. The social isolation was immediate and profound. Even some of the community center volunteers, who had initially expressed solidarity, began to distance themselves. A few called, stammering excuses about personal commitments or not wanting to get involved. The pressure to conform, to not cross the powerful, was palpable. The community center itself felt different. The vibrant energy that usually filled its halls was replaced by a quiet tension. Fewer people showed up for classes and events, and the usual chatter in the lobby dwindled to hushed whispers. My beloved space was becoming a battleground. I found myself replaying the incident, questioning if I could have handled it differently, if my resolve had been too strong. But each time, the image of the choir members' hurt faces solidified my conviction. I had done what was right, regardless of the consequences. Chloe's public narrative was simple and effective. I was an outsider, disrupting the harmony of a traditional Southern town. She leveraged the deep-seated fear of change and the reverence for old money and established families that permeated Willow Creek. The humiliation cut deep, but it also ignited a fierce determination within me. I wasn't just fighting for my job or my reputation. I was fighting for the very principles the community center stood for. I wouldn't let Chloe's bigotry define Willow Creek's future. I spent hours researching the center's bylaws, the town's historical records, anything that could give me a foothold. I knew Chloe was banking on my isolation, on the idea that I would crumble under the weight of public pressure. She underestimated me. My resolve hardened with each new insult, each averted gaze. I was an outsider, yes, but I was also deeply committed to this town and its potential. This wasn't just about Chloe and me. It was about what Willow Creek truly stood for. The whispers continued, a constant drone in the background of my life. But amidst them, a quiet strength began to grow within me. I knew I couldn't fight Chloe on her terms. I needed to find a different way, a way that would expose the truth beneath the surface. I realized that Chloe's despicable comment wasn't just an insult, it was a challenge. And I was ready to meet it, not with anger, but with a quiet, unwavering pursuit of justice. The game had begun, and I was prepared to play. The social offensive against me intensified, moving beyond online forums to real-world actions. Letters to the editor of the local newspaper, clearly orchestrated by Chloe or her sympathizers, began appearing, criticizing my management and calling for my removal from the community center. The pressure mounted daily. A group of prominent townspeople, many of whom were Chloe's close friends and distant relatives, initiated a formal petition for my dismissal. They cited disruptive behavior and a lack of understanding of community values as their reasons. The petition quickly gained signatures, fueled by fear and loyalty. The community center, once a bustling hub, now felt eerily quiet. Programs were canceled due to low attendance, and donations, which were vital for our operations, began to dry up. Chloe's influence was effectively strangling the very heart of Willow Creek. I tried to rally support, reaching out to those who had initially offered encouragement. Some stood firm, offering quiet words of solidarity, but many others, fearing repercussions for their own businesses or social standing, politely declined to get involved. The town was clearly divided, and the odds felt stacked against me. The isolation was a heavy burden. I found myself eating lunch alone, my usual coffee shop visits replaced by hurried trips to a gas station on the outskirts of town. The weight of being ostracized by a community I had come to love was almost unbearable. Chloe, meanwhile, seemed to revel in her newfound status as the town's defender of tradition. She hosted lavish garden parties, conspicuously inviting those who had signed the petition, further solidifying her power and isolating me. Her smug satisfaction was evident. I realized that Chloe wasn't just targeting me personally, she was targeting the progressive values the community center represented. Her actions were a calculated effort to maintain the old social order, where certain voices were privileged and others silenced. This wasn't just about a single incident anymore. It was about the very soul of Willow Creek. The deep historical roots of the town, which once seemed quaint, now felt like chains, binding people to outdated beliefs and prejudices. I spent my evenings poring over books on community organizing and social justice, seeking strategies, anything to counteract the powerful current flowing against me. I knew I couldn't fight Chloe's public relations machine with my own. I needed a different kind of weapon. My only solace came from a few unexpected allies. Mrs. Gable, an elderly woman who had been a quiet supporter of the center for years, and a young local reporter named Ben, who seemed genuinely troubled by the one-sided narrative dominating the town. Mrs. Gable, with her sharp mind and even sharper wit, would occasionally leave anonymous notes of encouragement at the center's door. Ben, though cautious, started asking pointed questions at town meetings, subtly challenging Chloe's carefully constructed facade. Their quiet support was a lifeline, reminding me that not everyone in Willow Creek had succumbed to Chloe's influence. It gave me the courage to keep fighting, to look beyond the immediate humiliation and seek a deeper truth. I began to see Chloe's campaign not just as a personal attack, but as a symptom of something much larger, something deeply ingrained in Willow Creek's past. If I was going to win this, I needed to understand the roots of that prejudice. The pressure was immense, but it also sharpened my focus. I knew Chloe was counting on me to break, to leave town with my tail between my legs. But giving up would mean letting her win, letting her define Willow Creek's future. I wouldn't allow it. The town was divided, yes, but I believe there was still a silent majority, waiting for someone to speak truth to power. I just needed to find a way to reach them, to break through the noise of Chloe's carefully crafted narrative. The constant pressure from Chloe and her allies forced me to dig deeper, to look beyond the immediate conflict. I realized that her casual racism wasn't an isolated incident. It was a reflection of something deeply embedded in Willow Creek's past, something her family had long benefited from. I started spending my evenings at the Willow Creek Historical Society, a dusty, quiet building filled with forgotten stories. The archivist, a kind but reserved woman named Eleanor Vance, seemed initially wary of my presence, given the ongoing town gossip. I explained my research was for a community history project, a plausible cover. I pored over old town records, property deeds, and faded newspaper clippings, searching for patterns, for any hint of the deep historical roots that underpinned Chloe's family's power. What I found was unsettling. Generations of Sterlings had systematically acquired land from struggling families, often through questionable means, particularly from minority landowners during economically challenging times. The language in some of the old documents was chillingly dismissive. One particular set of records detailed the acquisition of a large tract of land, now prime real estate in Willow Creek, from a prominent African-American family in the early 20th century. The transaction seemed legal on the surface, but the circumstances hinted at coercion and unfair valuation. I cross-referenced names, dates, and property lines. The Sterling family's wealth and influence had grown exponentially over the decades, often coinciding with the sudden decline or disappearance of other families, especially those of color, from the town's economic landscape. Eleanor, initially distant, began to observe my diligent work. One afternoon, she quietly placed an old, leather-bound ledger on my table, its pages brittle with age. "This," she whispered, "is from my grandmother's time. She was a clerk at the county office." The ledger contained informal notes, personal observations, and even some letters from Eleanor's grandmother detailing the systemic pressures faced by minority landowners. It painted a vivid picture of how legal transactions often masked deep-seated discrimination and exploitation. One entry, dated 1938, detailed a specific incident involving the Johnson Grove property, now a part of the Sterling family's most valuable landholdings. It described how the Johnson family, a respected black family, was pressured into selling their ancestral land for a fraction of its worth. The notes explicitly mentioned Chloe Sterling's great-grandfather, a man lauded in town history books as a visionary developer, as the primary orchestrator of these unfair dealings. His vision was built on the dispossession of others. This wasn't just historical anecdote. It was a direct link between Chloe's family wealth and the very type of systemic racism I was fighting against. Her current bigotry wasn't an isolated flaw. It was a continuation of a deeply ingrained family legacy. I felt a surge of cold determination. This was the weapon I needed, not just to defend myself, but to expose the truth about Willow Creek's foundations. The faded photographs and forgotten names in those ledgers held the key to my vindication. I meticulously copied relevant entries, photographed documents, and cross-referenced every piece of information. Eleanor, seeing my dedication, became a silent but powerful ally, offering guidance and access to even more obscure records. The more I uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Chloe's despicable comment wasn't just personal, it was an echo of generations of privilege built on the marginalization of others. She was merely upholding a family tradition of discrimination. I knew presenting this information would shake Willow Creek to its core. It would challenge the very identity of the town, forcing it to confront uncomfortable truths about its celebrated past. But it was a confrontation that was long overdue. I packed my findings carefully, a weighty collection of evidence that transcended mere gossip. The whispers against me would soon be drowned out by the undeniable echoes of history. Chloe Sterling's public humiliation of me was about to backfire spectacularly. With the historical documents in hand, I felt a renewed sense of purpose, but also a profound apprehension. How could I present this information in a small town where Chloe's family was revered, where challenging their legacy felt like sacrilege? I needed more than just documents. I needed a voice the town would listen to. One afternoon, as I was leaving the Historical Society, I saw Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman who had left me anonymous notes, sitting on a bench outside. She looked frail, but her eyes, when they met mine, were sharp and knowing. "You've been digging, haven't you, dear?" she said, her voice raspy. My heart skipped a beat. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But something in her gaze, a deep understanding, prompted me to trust her. I cautiously began to tell her about the Johnson Grove property, the old ledger, and Chloe's great-grandfather. Mrs. Gable listened intently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she sighed, a long, weary sound. "I knew the Johnsons," she said softly. "They were good people, and what happened to them was a travesty, swept under the rug by folks who wanted to keep Willow Creek cleaned." Then she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "My father was a lawyer here, Maya. He tried to help the Johnsons, but he was threatened. He kept a personal file, a detailed account of what he called the injustices of Willow Creek." My breath hitched. "A file? Do you still have it?" I asked, barely daring to hope. This could be the irrefutable evidence, the personal testimony that would give my historical findings the emotional weight they needed. She nodded slowly. "It's in my attic. I haven't looked at it in decades. It's hard to revisit such painful memories." Her eyes welled up slightly, but her resolve was clear. "But it's time, isn't it? Time for Willow Creek to face its truth." The next day, I went to Mrs. Gable's quaint, old house. The attic was dusty and filled with forgotten treasures. After an hour of searching, she pulled out a worn wooden box, inside which lay a thick, leather-bound folder. The folder contained meticulously organized letters, sworn affidavits, and detailed legal notes from Mrs. Gable's father. They chronicled not just the Johnson Grove incident, but several other similar cases, all involving the Sterling family and their systematic acquisition of land from minority families. One affidavit, signed by a former Sterling family employee, described how Chloe's great-grandfather had deliberately created financial hardship for the Johnsons, then offered to buy their land at a fraction of its value, implying dire consequences if they refused. This was a smoking gun. It wasn't just historical speculation. It was a personal, documented account of calculated racial discrimination and economic exploitation. The deep historical roots were now exposed, raw and undeniable. Mrs. Gable looked at me, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. My father always said the truth would find its way out, eventually. He just wished he could have seen it. Her willingness to share this deeply personal and painful history was an act of immense courage. I thanked her, my voice thick with emotion. This was the surprising element, the unlikely confidant who held the key to unlocking Willow Creek's past. Her father's meticulous records provided the human face to the historical injustices. I spent the next few days cross-referencing her father's file with my own findings, building an unassailable case. The narrative Chloe had spun about me, the despicable outsider, was about to be shattered by the weight of her family's own history. The social suspense that had gripped Willow Creek was about to reach its climax. I knew Chloe would fight back fiercely, but now I had the truth on my side, backed by the testimony of a respected, long-standing Willow Creek family. This wasn't just about my vindication anymore. It was about healing a wound that had festered in Willow Creek for generations. The stage was set for a public reckoning, and I was ready to unveil the truth. The annual Willow Creek Town Hall meeting was scheduled for the following week, a perfect, albeit daunting, platform. It was typically a sleepy affair, but this year, the tension surrounding my dismissal and Chloe's campaign had ensured a packed house. The entire town, it seemed, was eager for a resolution. I arrived early with Mrs. Gable and Ben, the young reporter, who had promised to document the proceedings thoroughly. Chloe Sterling was already there, holding court with her usual entourage, her expression a picture of confident superiority. She smirked as she saw me, clearly expecting my public defeat. The meeting began with routine matters, but an undercurrent of anticipation vibrated through the room. When it came time for public comments, I signed up, my name the first on the list. A hush fell over the room as I approached the podium, every eye fixed on me. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice clear and steady, despite the tremor in my hands. "I'm here tonight not to defend myself against personal attacks, but to speak about the true history of our beloved Willow Creek." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Chloe leaned forward, a frown creasing her brow. I could feel her disdain, but I pressed on, drawing strength from Mrs. Gable's quiet presence in the front row. "For weeks," I continued, "I've been publicly humiliated and called despicable for upholding the values of inclusivity at our community center. But the incident with Miss Sterling was not isolated. It was a symptom of a deeper, unaddressed issue in our town." I paused, letting my words sink in. Then I began to present the evidence, calmly and methodically. I projected images of the old property deeds, the historical society records, and the entries from Eleanor Vance's grandmother's ledger detailing the Sterling family's land acquisitions. "These documents," I explained, pointing to a particularly damning entry, "show a pattern of land acquisition from minority families, often under duress, for significantly undervalued prices. This isn't just history, it's the foundation of some of Willow Creek's most prominent fortunes." Chloe's face, initially smug, began to pale. Her allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The murmurs in the room grew louder, but this time they were whispers of shock and disbelief, not condemnation of me. Then I introduced Mrs. Gable, who, with remarkable courage, stepped forward to share her father's detailed file. She spoke of the Johnson Grove case, her voice filled with quiet conviction, recounting how her father had tried to fight the injustice, only to be silenced. Her words, delivered by a respected elder of the community, resonated deeply. The raw, personal testimony brought the dusty historical documents to life, painting a vivid picture of systemic racism that had been hidden in plain sight for generations. Chloe's lawyer, who was surprisingly present, immediately stood up, attempting to object, claiming the information was irrelevant and defamatory. But the judge, a visiting magistrate overseeing the meeting, allowed me to continue. "This is not defamation," I stated, my voice gaining strength. "This is a historical record, and it directly relates to the pattern of behavior that led to Miss Sterling's dismissal from the community center. Her actions echo a painful legacy." The atmosphere in the room was electric. The silence that followed was not of judgment against me, but of a town grappling with an uncomfortable truth. The tide had begun to turn, slowly but undeniably. Chloe, for the first time, looked truly shaken. Her public humiliation of me was now overshadowed by the public unveiling of her family's dark past. The social suspense had flipped, and she was now the one under scrutiny. I concluded my presentation, leaving the documents and Mrs. Gable's father's file for public review. Willow Creek has a choice, I stated. We can continue to ignore our past, or we can confront it, learn from it, and build a truly inclusive future. As I stepped down from the podium, the room erupted, not in applause, but in a cacophony of voices, a town finally beginning to reckon with its history. The showdown was far from over, but the truth was finally out. The town hall meeting was the spark that ignited a long-overdue reckoning in Willow Creek. Ben, the young reporter, published a meticulously researched article in the local paper detailing my findings and Mrs. Gable's testimony. The story quickly went viral, picked up by regional news outlets, shattering Chloe's carefully constructed narrative. The public humiliation Chloe had inflicted on me now boomeranged back with devastating force. The comment section of the online article, once filled with attacks against me, was now overflowing with outrage directed at the Sterling family and their historical injustices. More people, emboldened by Mrs. Gable's courage, began coming forward with their own family stories, tales of land lost, opportunities denied, and dignity stripped away. The community center became a hub for these testimonies, a safe space for long-silenced voices. Legal experts, alerted by the media coverage, began investigating the historical land transactions. The local district attorney, under immense public pressure, announced a formal inquiry into the Sterling family's past dealings, particularly concerning the Johnson Grove property. Chloe Sterling, once the untouchable socialite, found herself at the center of a swirling storm of public condemnation. Her garden parties ceased, her social invitations dried up, and even her most loyal allies began to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with such a tarnished legacy. The irony was not lost on me. She had called me despicable for standing up to racism, and now the entire community, and indeed the wider region, was labeling her family's history as truly despicable. Justice, it seemed, was slowly but surely finding its way. The community center, which Chloe had tried to dismantle, experienced a resurgence. Donations poured in from outside Willow Creek, and volunteers, ashamed of their earlier silence, returned with renewed vigor. It became a symbol of hope and a catalyst for change. The Sterling family, facing immense public and legal pressure, issued a terse statement denying any wrongdoing, but the evidence was overwhelming. Their carefully cultivated image of benevolent philanthropists crumbled under the weight of historical truth. I watched from a distance as Chloe's world imploded. There was no triumph in my heart, only a quiet satisfaction that the truth had finally prevailed. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability and healing for a community. The local council, deeply embarrassed by the revelations, passed a resolution acknowledging the historical injustices and pledging to work towards reconciliation. It was a small step, but a significant one for a town so steeped in tradition. The descendants of the Johnson family, many of whom had left Willow Creek generations ago, began to return, drawn by the news. They met at the community center, sharing stories, finding solace and strength in their shared history. Chloe's public humiliation was complete when a local historical marker, once honoring her great-grandfather, was quietly removed. The town was beginning to rewrite its history, not through denial, but through honest acknowledgement. The reckoning was painful for many in Willow Creek, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about their town and their own complicity in maintaining the status quo. But from the ashes of discomfort, a stronger, more honest community began to emerge. My dismissal of Chloe for racism had not only exposed her bigotry, but had also unearthed a century of hidden injustices. The unexpected consequences had led to a profound and necessary reckoning for Willow Creek. The journey was far from over, but the first major battle had been won. The truth, once buried, now stood tall, illuminating the path forward for a town ready to heal and grow. The legal inquiry into the Sterling family's historical land dealings concluded with a landmark decision. While direct legal restitution for past injustices was complex, the court ordered the establishment of a substantial community fund, managed by an independent board, to support educational and economic initiatives for minority families in Willow Creek. Chloe Sterling, though not directly charged with historical crimes, faced significant social and financial repercussions. Her family's reputation was irrevocably tarnished, and many of their business ventures suffered as a result of public backlash and scrutiny. She quietly left Willow Creek, her influence completely diminished. My vindication was complete. The community center thrived, becoming a beacon of inclusivity and historical dialogue. We launched new programs focused on racial reconciliation, local history education, and economic empowerment, drawing support from across the state. I remained at the helm, but my role shifted. I was no longer just a manager. I was a facilitator of healing, a voice for justice, and a symbol of Willow Creek's capacity for change. The town, once divided, was slowly but surely coming together. The descendants of the Johnson family, with support from the new community fund, established a scholarship program in their ancestors' names, ensuring that future generations would have opportunities that were once denied. It was a powerful act of reclamation and hope. My personal life also found a new rhythm. The isolation I had felt dissolved as new friendships blossomed, built on shared values and a commitment to a better Willow Creek. The young reporter, Ben, became a close confidant, and together, we continued to shed light on important local issues. I often reflected on Chloe's words, "You are despicable." In her eyes, standing up to racism was contemptible. But in the eyes of a community finally awakening, it was an act of courage and integrity. My worth was not defined by her judgment. The experience had transformed me. I was stronger, more resilient, and more deeply committed to social justice than ever before. The fear that had initially gripped me had been replaced by a quiet confidence, born from having faced adversity and emerged victorious. Willow Creek was still a small southern town, and change was gradual, but the seeds had been planted. The painful reckoning had cleared the ground for new growth, for a future where history was acknowledged and all voices were heard. The community center hosted its next Heritage Festival, and this time, it was truly inclusive, a vibrant celebration of all the diverse threads that made up Willow Creek's rich tapestry. The gospel choir performed again, their music filling the air with joy and triumph. I saw Mrs. Gable in the crowd, her eyes sparkling with pride. She had lived to see the truth her father had fought for finally emerge. Her courage had been instrumental in Willow Creek's journey towards justice. The story of Willow Creek, and my part in it, became a testament to the power of standing up against discrimination, even when the odds seem insurmountable. It showed that even in places with deep historical roots, change is possible. My journey had been unexpected, filled with public humiliation and intense pressure. But the surprising and just outcome had proven that truth, when pursued with unwavering conviction, can indeed set a community free. I learned that sometimes the most profound changes begin with a single act of defiance, a refusal to let prejudice stand. And that even in the face of being called despicable, one can find the strength to build a better, more equitable world. Willow Creek was no longer just a town. It was a living example of resilience, reconciliation, and the enduring power of justice. And I, Maya, was proud to be a part of its unfolding story.